This episode of Instant Analysis is brought to you by Platinum Storage Group and Real Estate Investments. For USCFootball.com, I'm Keely Eure here with Dan Weber for Instant Analysis of Day 15 of the Todd McNair NCAA trial. And today we heard the in-person testimony of Eleanor Myers, who was a former voting member on the Committee on Infractions for the USC case. And the USC case was actually her first sitting in on a committee. She was a voting member, she wasn't just sitting in, but that was her first case that she handled, and she was an interesting witness because the NCAA, for the first time this trial, actually got to talk to her, interview her first, so they kind of got to set the groundwork for her as a person, and she kind of seemed at least more credible than the other witnesses that the NCAA had called up beforehand. She knew what she was talking about for the most part. She had the details. She seemed like a bookworm who kind of, she said she read all the papers for the case, so she seemed, at least from what the NCAA set up, that she was more credible than the rest of the committee members.
Well, she knew most of the answers to the questions she knew the NCAA attorneys were going to ask her. Yeah. I mean, that's who she was. She didn't, for example, she's the longtime faculty athletic rep at Temple, her alma mater. And her family, big Temple, basketball fans and go to away games and all that. She had no idea who Todd McNair was, one of the great football players in Temple history. And that's saying something because they don't have a lot of great football players. Had no idea who he was. Didn't know. They both have relatives. He's from Pennsauken. She's got relatives there. Had no idea. She also didn't have any idea that USC was a private school. She thought it was part of the Cal system, thought it was out in the suburbs somewhere. I don't know. She thought it was Pepperdine or whatever. But she didn't know a lot of things in different ways. She just didn't know stuff that you might assume she would know because one of the things you want the people on the Committee on Infractions to know is what's going on in college sports, because they're given the power to use their own experience and their own expertise to understand what's happening. And again, this was her first ever case. She's now the longest serving member. This is her 9th year. So She's been on this, so she's still on the committee. And as the McNair attorneys pointed out, she was huddling with the NCAA attorneys, or her attorneys. She was huddling with them over the weekend, and she was out here on the NCAA's dime. I mean, they had said, "Are you volunteering?" "Oh, yeah." And then the McNair attorney said, "But did they pay for you to come out here?" And she said, "Oh, yeah, they did." So it was interesting, kind of back and forth with someone who really wanted, and said this, she wanted to be the smartest person in the room. She wanted to know everything. I think she believed a lot of the stuff that was going on, and she admitted absolutely she had no idea that those 3 guys were doing all the things behind her back that they were doing during the hearings. Didn't know about that, didn't really read that email all the way, even though the one she said she didn't read all the way, she wholeheartedly endorsed the sentiment. It was that kind of a day. But again, if you're following Dennis Thomas on the NCAA roster of Committee on Infractions members, you do not have a high bar to, jump over to look pretty good. So she did.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you about, because it's an interesting predicament, because I guess the bar was kind of set low as far as witnesses go, that when she came to the stand, she seemed at least earnest. She seemed to know what she was talking about as on the whole. If you really pieced out what she was saying, you kind of then were like, how did she come off to the jury? Because it was an interesting predicament where, as a witness, how she presented herself.
Yeah, I mean, she admitted that when you get down to the key piece of evidence that just convinced all of them that Lloyd Lake was really believable and Todd McNair wasn't, is the phone call, the middle of the night phone call. And they have all these reasons about why I mean, they in their own mind have justified the exact things that Lloyd Lake said to her. I mean, they're saying, well, how would you forget that if you're Todd McNair, a profanity-laced phone call? They don't know if it was profanity-laced or not. They don't know one word that was said in that phone call. But they're telling themselves they did. They're doing things like, and she had to, they are reconstructing sentence fragments from different pages in the transcript of Lloyd Lake's interview, and putting it together and saying, yeah, that's what he said. I believe that makes sense. even though one of the people who did the interviews said it was factually inaccurate. And that interview keeps coming up because in the final report, someone rewrote that interview as to who called who and when they did it, and they say things like, well, everybody knew at the hearing what year that happened and who called who, but it wasn't rewritten until the final report, and they can't tell you who rewrote it, when it was rewritten. Was that changing the facts, or was that just parsing or reconstructing? So she seemed, as you said, I think the word earnest is correct, but she seemed just totally not able to answer all those questions, and yet at the same time she could certainly answer all the questions that the NCAA asked her in her opening of her testimony.
Mm-hmm. The interesting thing, I thought that one of the things she said was she was trying to paint the picture that they were trying to get Todd McNair to really explain at the hearing about the January 8th call. She said that McNair had ample opportunity to explain himself. She said, we were begging McNair to just tell us the truth, which is an interesting sentence because McNair said in his testimony, you cannot make me know Lloyd Lake, but it seems like they're trying to, if you're begging him to give the truth is then subjective, right?
Well, they're saying, tell us our truth. We've decided what the truth is here, and if you would only tell us, that would help you. And maybe Todd even knew that. And Todd, to this day, and as Bruce Broilette pointed out, Todd didn't agree with that in the hearing 8 years ago. And today, on the stand, he doesn't agree with that. So he testified under oath. He's been consistent, where Lloyd Lake, not only did he not let anyone outside, anyone from USC, anyone from Todd McNair's legal team question him. He obviously wasn't under oath, which for a bit there, Eleanor didn't seem like she remembered whether he was under oath or not. And Bruce Broilette said, you can't put him under oath. You're the NCAA. So, oh, yeah, that's right. And he made the point that, look, you guys were the ones that didn't ask him the right questions. You guys were the ones that didn't ask him enough questions. If we don't know, and you have to you have to reconstruct his sentence fragments, somebody screwed up here, and it wasn't Todd McNair. So I thought they in a subtle way kind of made it clear that even though she was trying to be really good about this, that maybe she fell short. And why wouldn't she? It was her first time, first hearing, first time she got a vote. And she said things like she didn't know USC football was a moneymaker when Bruce said, you knew it supported the entire athletic program. She didn't know, let's see, what else? There was, she still, for example, as a reason that Todd was not telling the truth, were all those hundreds of phone calls that he made to Reggie Bush and how close they were. And then, it's come out in this trial that was like 1.5 a week.
Yeah.
And she doesn't know that.
Yeah. She's
still basing her decision about, and basing the fact that that Todd McNair is an unethical, lying so-and-so who had plenty of chances to tell the truth, and he just won't come around. And yet, I would guess that if you went through her testimony today, she probably told more untruths or half-truths or no answer at all than Todd ever has. And that's kind of a shame.
The interesting thing about Eleanor Myers is that through the emails we can kind of glean that she was undecided she was wrestling with the finding Todd McNair with an unethical conduct finding.
And how we know that is the emails from the other guys who kept talking about, we got to get her to come around. We got to, figure out how to go after this, or Eleanor's not giving up. She's still asking questions and all that. So we know that because that's how, and she acted like, wow, that's news to me. That's kind of a compliment. I didn't know any of this, that they were doing all this, back channel stuff. Who knew? But I didn't pay any attention to it. Nobody else did.
Yeah, so she said that she was having trouble coming to that conclusion, but we never, it was kind of a gray area what, after the hearing, changed her mind to then come to a consensus to what the committee agreed on. We never really found out what exactly changed her mind, or when she changed her mind, or how she changed her mind.
No, we didn't, and we also didn't find, and they came up with an answer because they know there were starting to be questions about, wait a minute, you guys met the end of February, you didn't have a decision when you left Arizona, you didn't have a decision all of March, all of April, and you can't even tell us you had one in May, and you come out with a report in June. And they asked her, well, why was it taking that long? And she said, well, we needed the transcript. We needed to look at the transcript, and it took forever. And he said, their NCAA attorney said, oh, one or 2 days, right? And she said, no, a month. And I think, okay, a month, which puts you into the last week of March. They didn't come up with a decision till, I don't know, sometime in May or June, and can't tell you. I mean, she even said normally she would get, if she didn't have time, and she was heading to Rome. So if she didn't have time for them to send her the draft, they would read it to her. She said she didn't get either one. But she was hoping, it was interesting, she was hoping that they would get that to her before she left the country. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, the final decision, the final verdict, the final everything, you didn't get to see it? How do you sign it if you didn't see it? There were a lot of loose ends.
Yeah.
But she handled it like there weren't.
Yeah, and one of the loose ends that kind of stood out to me was Kostas Sikojevic, the NCAA lawyer, asked her at the end of his direct examination of her, were you bullied into the outcome of the committee? She said, well, I don't get bullied. But
I'm glad she didn't say, nobody bullies Eleanor Myers, as Dennis Thomas would have said.
But the thing is that he kind of left that hanging there. What is there? Was she bullied? Is that an option? And I don't think that was necessarily touched on in the cross-examination.
Well, and she said, you would love to say, well, then what did get you to change your mind? Yeah. And she said, reading the transcript. Well, of Lake's interview especially, and you think it was unintelligible. He said Todd made the call, and he said stuff that were sentence fragments on this page and on that page and on this page, and she read that, and then it was all okay? No, I mean that's not. They want to sell you how unbelievable they thought Todd was, because, for example, the photo with Lloyd Lake and Michael Michaels and the 3 phone calls to Lloyd Lake's number came on the same night. So Todd's totally unbelievable. Well, I was just trying to think about this. If you had a scale of credibility or believability from this case, and you said NCAA, Todd McNair, and who else? Oh, Lloyd Lake. You would put Todd McNair first, I would think, in terms of credibility. I don't think it's even close. I'm not sure between NCAA and Lloyd Lake where they would go, but this is not. If the NCAA were grading themselves the way they graded Todd McNair, they're all guilty of unethical conduct. This is not something to be proud of. That's why maybe the NCAA had 12 people in court today, including their top 2 legal officers from Indianapolis. This was a big deal for the NCAA, and they had as many people as the jury.
Yeah, it was definitely interesting in that regard. The last notable thing I think came from her testimony is that Eleanor maintained, like the rest of the NCAA committee members, that Todd McNair had nothing to do with the increased sanctions after they made a finding on Todd McNair. But she said that the extra sanctions, the extra scholarship reductions, were to satisfy Paul Dee and Paul Dee's need for a TV ban. And what we heard last week from Brian Halloran, who was on the committee, he never took the TV ban seriously. So why are they satisfying Paul Dee? It just didn't make sense, that line, and it definitely stood out to me.
Good point. That makes absolutely no sense. I mean, it's probably not legal. They probably would have gotten sued. You think Missy Conboy from Notre Dame would have said, yeah, TV ban, that's great. We'll just tell NBC we don't have a USC game this year. I mean, yeah, that'll be fine. No, nobody was going to do. So to act like the dead guy was telling them something that, are you going to cross-examine Paul Dee now? I mean, and to tell him something that is clearly ridiculous on its face, and to say, oh, well, we took that off the table and we decided to jump USC from 6 scholarships to 30 scholarships lost. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, right. And they say, the TV ban, oh, yeah, Paul was serious about this. And yet you say, well, on that first list of 18 possible penalties, it wasn't there. So how serious was it? I mean, if you listen to Paul Dee as the chairman when he announced the USC penalties, the one thing that came through was he was thrilled to death that the USC penalties were worse than the Miami penalties. If he'd have gotten a TV ban on there, they would have been. He couldn't get that, so they got 30 scholarships. That was worse than Miami. So, that's just the way they rolled. But there's not going to be any cross-examination of Paul Dee.
No. So Eleanor's testimony was actually sandwiched in the day. We finished Greg Sankey's video deposition. He's the SEC commissioner. And then we actually ended the day with Peter Furmuzis, I believe is his last name. Furmuzis, that's what it is. And he's an economic expert. He is basically going to tell the jury from Todd McNair's side what Todd McNair could have earned had the NCAA not done what they did. And then tomorrow we will probably hear from the NCAA's economic expert to kind of battle that finding.
Yeah, we're already from 2009 to 2017, which he totals up as he calculated that Todd McNair was in the 75th percentile of assistant coaches' salaries in the Power 5 schools. So if he stayed there, that number has gone from like whatever it was, 200 and some thousand a year to 483,000. So he calculated that Todd would have has missed out on like $2.818 million. He hasn't calculated the going forward yet and where that's going to take him, and that's where we're going to start tomorrow. And I'm sure the NCAA's guy's going to come in and say, no, that's not. Here's you're not figuring everything into this equation. And then with Greg Sankey, it was just more of what he's pretty good in terms of avoiding giving you the answer you want. I mean, the whole point was the SEC, the biggest, strongest, conference in college football, has put in a new bylaw that if you're, have you been involved in a major infractions case, guilty of unethical conduct, and the Southeastern Conference school wants to hire you, their president or their chancellor has to get on the phone and talk to Greg Sankey and kind of justify that, which no president or no chancellor wants to do. He says they have made some hires like that. Didn't have any names or numbers or whatever, but I think they're obviously making the point that for the NCAA to say that Todd McNair's unethical conduct finding in this USC case was no big deal, as Dennis Thomas said yesterday, a minuscule penalty. They're making the point that no, that's obviously not the case, and that's why they had Sankey, talking about it.
Mm-hmm. I know we're going long, but I just one last question for you. So I know we kind of pointed out the holes in Eleanor Myers' testimony, but it seemed on the whole, at least she appeared somewhat credible. It seemed like some points were scored for the NCAA today. How did you think today played out?
Well, I mean, I think you can measure credibility if your game plan is to say, look, we tried hard, we might have screwed this thing up, man, we got those questions wrong and the facts wrong, and we really thought that this multiple felon heading back to prison, gangbanger, she even told us today, extortionist who was trying to extort money from Reggie Bush, and we believed him. And maybe we got, who knows, did we get that right or wrong? I don't know. But we weren't malicious. No, we were just what we were. And those three guys that were saying those horrible things about Todd McNair, don't pay any attention to them, because we didn't. Even though they talked about building momentum in the deliberations, and even though they talked about how they had to, win people like Eleanor over, and there was no decision for all this time. Don't pay any attention to that. This wasn't malice, and I was trying really hard. And I got all my basic insight into how to be on this committee from Joe Patuta, and we had a wonderful 45-minute phone call. And she was asked, well, in that phone call, because she had mentioned that she was willing to recuse herself just because of the fact that she found out Todd McNair was a Temple graduate and she's teaching at Temple. Said, should I recuse myself? Immediately, she said. Well, Josephine Batuto, 2 years before, had said she watched the Real Sports TV show Interview with Lake and said, I believe this ex-con agent. And Bruce said, did she mention that to you when she was talking to you for 45 minutes about being on the committee? And she had to say, no, she didn't. So, you know, a lot of moments like that.
Yeah, we'll see how it plays out, I guess. We're coming down the home stretch, so we'll see. For Dan Weber, I'm Keely Eure. For more, check out uscfootball.com.